Michelle Irving, an executive coach for women with chronic illness, is joining us today. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Christina. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so happy that you're here. You recently saw a video that we did with a leader who shared a bit of her story about living with a chronic illness and leading teams. And that's how we connected, which is amazing. And you work exclusively with women in positions of leadership who live with chronic illness.
I do. That's what I do.
How did you get to this spot where you have this niche?
So have had my own career and leadership track while also living with chronic illness. And I've had a couple of times in the last decade where I have been bedbound for a number of months. One of those first times took me out of the workforce and on insurance, and then I made myself, the way back. And one of those, I was bedbound, but I still was able to work. They're quite different situations. But what happened is each time as I recovered and started to go back to the office, people would come and ask me about how I navigated it. And one of the reasons was because I was super clear in every single experience I've had is how can I use this experience to deepen my own personal power? How can I use this experience to be more connected to myself, to bring more power into my mental, emotional, and even in stages, my physical body? And so what that did was obviously, without me saying anything, start to radiate, because you can't hide not being at the office for a number of months. Like, everybody knows something has happened. So when you return, there is this sort of conversation. And I was very open to having this conversation because what I knew was what I'd worked out was really helpful for other people. And that then led now to running a business, executive coaching women with chronic illness, to both navigate the experience of their career as well as how to do that in a way that works for them and their body.
When you first found yourself in a place where your body was not cooperating with you, where things were starting to go awry, did it take a long time for you to get a diagnosis and to understand what was happening?
So I have a diagnosis because of my vanity. So I was 35. I had dark circles under my eyes that makeup wouldn't cover. And, at 35, I was like doing yoga 3 times a week. I was walking to the office. I was taking hip hop classes. I was like on it. So this was a problem as far as I was concerned. And I went to my general practitioner and she said, well, let's just do some tests. And that led to about a 9-month process. And it turned out I have an autoimmune condition of my liver. Now, the dark circles were very faint from everybody else's perspective. And when you have a condition that affects your liver, you don't know usually till it's irreversible and you're starting to really get a lot of symptoms, but it can take many years. So my diagnosis came because of my vanity, and it also came very early. And that enabled me to have good health for a number of years. And then I had to take some very serious treatment about 7 years later. And then that was the time at which actually it was the treatment which had me bedbound, not necessarily the condition.
You found this importance in discovering power within the confines or despite the confines of having a chronic illness. And that makes me think that for a time, it felt like you lost your power. Is that true?
Totally. I think what happened in that 7 years from diagnosis to significant treatment at the time, I felt I had to fight to be heard in the doctor's office. I had to fight to get the details of the condition rather than just be a good girl, take the treatment, leave. And one of the reasons I had to fight is because the treatment they gave me. So remember, I was like really fit going to the office. I was good. And when I first got the treatment, it made me sleep 18 out of 24 hours a day. So I could
Wow.
barely get dressed, go to the office. And by the time I got there, I had to turn around and go home because I was done. That was on treatment. And then off treatment, if I didn't take the treatment at that time, I was good. So we went through a lot of testing of treatment protocols, and I was very determined that I was the decision maker about what worked for me, and that the medical doctors and specialists, they were my advisors. But I had to learn to build this power to hold that in the room when some specialist looked at me and said, well, I think we've reached the end of medical science's capacity to, work this for you if you won't take the treatment that I've suggested. And I had to be in that room and think to myself, no, we haven't, and go and get another opinion. And in fact, it was that process that then got me on the path to a treatment process that did work for me. So I think I had to learn my boundaries and my power en route. And that question
Mhm.
of how can I find more power internally? How can I do this where I am in what I call my sovereignty? That was a very big guiding question for me in the experience.
Mhm. Our culture is so geared towards handing power over to the MDs, is
Yes.
that they know best. follow the doctor's orders. And in so many cases, that's great advice. But when you get into this realm of these diseases that we don't actually have a great understanding of, something else has to take over. When we hand over the decisions to somebody else, it really does feel powerless. I love the reframe of physicians, specialists as advisors to take their opinion, their recommendation into account, but not to make the decision for you.
So, what I did with myself in this situation was I thought of it, particularly when I was at the edge of bedbound. And what happened with that is we'd been monitoring treatment. I'd been, really doing a very small amount in agreements. So, what I thought of with my clinician is really that we're going to make agreements. We're not making rules about treatment. We're going to make agreements between his recommendations and what I'm going to do. And one of those recommendation agreements that I had was the day that he said to me that I turned up to an appointment. And if he said to me, you take treatment today, we do this today, we do this, that I knew that was the day that we would do what he said. And that process, I agreed to be monitored. I agreed, to keep going to appointments. That's my part of the agreement because he has my best interests at heart. And I know clinicians are not, malicious people. They have put in a lot of effort. They know the terrain of the disease quite well in terms of what they see, generally speaking. And I also know that after 7 or 8 years, I've got a pretty good handle on it. But I'm not a liver transplant specialist. I don't know the point at which transplant has to come in and how far before that you have to have good treatment on board. And so I arrived at, my regular hospital appointment, and he looked at my results and said, you do not leave this hospital without treatment today. And because I had that internal agreement of like, oh, okay, this is the day. And what that meant for me was that I saw the clinician. It was like I was in a castle and he was at the wall, sitting at the top of the barrier, and he could see what the threat was coming. So I didn't need to know the threat or how we were going to manage it. I just needed to know that when he came and said to me, okay, now we enact the plan, that was the day we enacted the plan. That was still my decision, but this is how I thought of it, that he was defending against the disease for me. And that stopped me being at war with myself. And then what I'm doing is taking advice.
Wow. And that day when you didn't leave the hospital, did the treatments provide you with what you needed?
So the treatment had me bedbound for 9 months. And it was one of the aspects of that is they wanted to give me a drug that I knew deeply affected my mental health. And I said, I won't take that drug without a psych consult. So I understand that is a drug that needs to happen, but I won't take that without a psych consult because I didn't have that the first time. And they had a psychiatrist to me within 45 minutes. And again, I was like, oh, okay, this is serious. Okay. Yeah. So the treatment did work. And actually, I'm on the same treatment now, literally 10 years later, actually. And it's perfect. My life runs beautifully on that treatment. But it did take at higher doses, this 9-month process of being in bed and not being able to get food, having to have roster people for my washing. I was well and truly sleeping 18 out of 24 hours a day. And I slowly made my way back to work, but I went back to work 5 hours a week, spread over 3 days under medical supervision. And then, of course, time passes on and then I'm fully back.
You have made a living out of advising, out of coaching women in positions of leadership that are living with chronic illness. And part of that is heartbreaking.
I wish that I was not needed. I wish that we had lived in a world where I was out of the job tomorrow. That would be beautiful. What I know, though, is at this point in time, navigating your career while living with chronic illness, there are 2 parts to that. You have to learn how to navigate the illness in order to also be able to navigate the career. Otherwise, the 2 of them, it feels like you're stop, start, or you're at war with your body. And there's all of that emotional distress and mental load of navigating the illness lives on top of your day working. And so the work that I do with women is we do the emotional work around being with the chronic condition while navigating career. And a lot of people, will have some support, but this nexus of your career and chronic illness, I don't know anybody else in that space. And this is a very critical space because the statistics tell us that you're talking 1 in 4 people at work are navigating a disability and chronic illness. Chronic illness is much higher, and most of those are invisible.
Well, you're talking to one of the 1 in 4s. And I know that I have felt like my body has been in war against me. I would love to hear a little bit more about how you make this separation or help women to make this separation so it's not this constant struggle of work despite my body.
Yes, this is huge because what happens is we push through. And then the body says, well, there's no more pushing through is going to happen today. And then we're in this constant roller coaster of emotions between, got a little bit of energy, I'm going to go for it, because I don't know how long it's going to last. And then there's all the distress and the disappointment. And what that does is add a layer of emotional and mental, literal burden in your nervous system. That is a weight that you are carrying through everything you do. And that in itself is what escalates the stress of navigating the career. So what we want to do is we want to work out what works for you and your body so that we've got harmony between the two things. So one of the things that I do is I teach women my own personal emotional map for navigating chronic illness. And to me, there are 4 stages emotionally of being with chronic illness. And in each of those emotional stages, then you have different tools and resources that you need for each of those 4 stages. And that tells you what can support your career and working in each of those 4 stages. The work that I'm doing with women in navigating career and chronic illness, we're looking for the practical emotional strategies at each of those stages. And so you'll see the map is actually the map for navigating chronic illness. And then we work out, what do we do at each of those stages for you? And how does your career map into this? So when you're at sea and you're, at work, what do we do to make that emotionally more easeful for you and for your body?
The map gives knowledge, gives a sense of where you are on the planet of chronic illness. And that brings about a sense of power, the knowledge in and of itself.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that there's a map in the first place makes you know very clearly you're not alone.
Exactly. And it's the case that what happens when you know there's a map is all of those feelings and thoughts and everything that's going on at any moment in your experience, you can start to say, oh, hang on a sec, that's here. So if I'm at sea, what usually happens when you're at sea, particularly for intelligent, talented, creative women, we're like strategizing, how do I get back and get that mountain climbed? And I want to be really gentle with you and say, when you're at sea, honey. Sea is where we need to focus our energy.
I'm laughing so hard because I developed a whole new branch of my business and started a launch while at sea because I was just so damn stubborn.
Yeah. And so what happens in that is because we're always trying to push through and get to the next stage. But if I say to you, okay, here's what you do at sea, then I've given you something to emotionally, mentally, and career-wise to do that actually maps the emotional stage. Because creating from exhaustion, despair, and misery, not only is that not a great creative process and not good for you, it's actually not good for anybody you're working with. It's actually not the way we want to work anymore because that's a very industrial model way of even thinking. I'm in misery, so let me create something. And what I want to do with you is say, here's what we do, because being at sea can be highly creative if you know how to tap into it. And so we want to have creativity that actually doesn't burn the body. And the creativity actually brings energy and joy into your system. And in many ways, emotionally, we know that whatever happens physically, as we demystify the emotions, as we de-stress the push, and I've got to work out my whole career, naturally your body's going to feel better. You are going to feel better. And emotionally, that's going to move you on through the stages. And so even if you are at sea, once you know this process, then you can use that time productively in a way that actually serves your whole life, because you're not in this trap of trying to push your body and you're trying to get out of the stress by creating more stress for yourself.
Michelle, I am first off, I'm so glad that you're doing well on the treatment now, that you're just in this place of being able to live life because you're doing what your map said. You're bringing back everything that you have to the village. And your village is women all across the United States.
It is. I'm, an Australian at the bottom end of one of the bottom countries of the world, but actually 80% of my clients are based in the US. And by that, I also mean those clients are, in leadership roles from a US company and they're in Europe. So there's a navigating of that process. And the truth is, I'm very well on this treatment. I actually have 2 chronic conditions, and the other one is a vertigo condition, vestibular migraine condition. And that had me bedbound in a very different way. So I've done it twice in the last decade and made my way back to work, both physically and emotionally. But I'm still, I want to be really clear and transparent with everybody. There are days when I wake up and if I've got vertigo and I can't get out of bed, that's a I'm at sea day. And I know what to do at that day, no matter what else is on the agenda. And I navigate my business in ways that work for me and my body. I have women who are on my team, and our whole business culture is to be in business in ways that work for us and our bodies. And so the team is set up a different way. And this conversation in terms of corporations, even there's one your individual experience, but companies are all over DEI and disability, and nobody even checks or has any idea how many people are navigating chronic illness. And we're treating them as if you just have to get well to return to work. Whereas the conversation is actually about how do we support you with the chronic condition, the same way we support people with disability. But it's a very different process emotionally, and it's different types of company adjustments that are really simple, that are not going to cost you a lot, but you need to understand to make it safe for the person with chronic illness. Because what happens is women with chronic illness who are working will burn out faster, and they will leave, and you will lose your talent. And you will think they're okay, because one of the last stages of a woman working with chronic illness before she leaves is she will do more work. So she will look like she's got more capacity. She will be overworking. And that is a sign, not that everything's okay. That's a sign that she's about to leave.
What can organizational leaders do to support women working for them with chronic illness, especially if they don't necessarily know who has a chronic illness?
Exactly. So that's the first thing. Chronic illness is like the iceberg sitting underneath a corporation. So in the US, let's think there's 133 million people with chronic illness and disability.
Wow.
Now, what happens in our mind is we think all those people are in the bedroom at sea. No, most of those people are at work, right? Because I know from our research, 75% of people are at work. And so now that's a different conversation. So the first thing is this is invisible. Everybody thinks of illness as your life is over until you get well and that you're hidden away in a bedroom. This is why nobody discloses it. What you don't know is actually all those people are working, they're pushing through, they're burning out, and a little bit of acknowledgement and support would transform their experience of working, because they're trying to keep it all hidden. And we know, just like in mental health, when it's kept all hidden, then that's a huge cost to an organization. So what we can do, and this is the other work that I do on the other side of my business, is work with companies about, first of all, awareness. So have somebody like me, or there's other people in this who are willing to speak about their experience. And when you have somebody come and speak to the organization, exactly like you and I've done, Christina, everybody comes up to the stage afterwards and says, oh, thank God, that's me. And so what I'm doing, because I'm willing to speak about it publicly and open that conversation, is I'm making space for everybody in that room to hear about an experience. Some people, it will be their personal experience. Some people are caring for the people with chronic illness. Some people know that one of their staff members has endometriosis and knows about that condition because their mother had it or their sister has it. And it's all being done quietly between individuals. And what we know from a corporation perspective is when you're getting agreements between individuals without actual support, that might go okay, but usually that goes awry. And you actually have no idea. It doesn't go anywhere. And you have no idea what's actually happening in your company. And so that's what we're doing, is we're building the programs, awareness, and then what we want is the actual support, both for managers and the people. So we're coaching people in their jobs. And the final thing is, what does advancement look like? And so that's the process.
Should organizations ask people to self-identify?
I think we want to do a lot more things to make it safe before we ask people to self-identify, right? So what we want to do is we want to build that awareness. We want to build things that are in the conversations within the culture, the same way we've had it about neurodiversity. We didn't go straight out in organizations and ask people to identify as neurodiverse. What we did was learn about neurodiversity, learn that actually a whole lot of people already have it here, and that their advancement is being stifled because we're not treating them and appropriately making advancement pathways for them. But their contribution to the company is significant. And in fact, advancement pathways for people with neurodiversity can really enrich the corporation's bottom line. And so chronic illness, what we think of, it's like, it's unwell, we're sick, what would we be doing there? And I want to share with you, it's your highly intelligent, highly talented, highly creative people who often have a chronic illness. It's not everybody, but you're looking at this as if people are, hidden away, when in fact if it's 1 in 4, it's 1 in 4 people at the table. And I have a beautiful example of this. I've run a whole interview series myself as a global summit with high-profile women living with chronic illness. And there's a fantastic woman, Fadi Katablu, who is at Salesforce, head of human ethics and design within Salesforce. So all the AI, all the privacy, all of the things in which we should be treating that ethical consideration within such a huge organization. And Fadi's had a thyroid condition since she was 7. So people don't know that she's had this incredible career at Forrester's Research. And, she's the go-to person for the Wall Street Journal around privacy in the US. She is a high-profile, high-stellar career woman. And she has navigated this experience of chronic illness her entire life. And so now she's at an age, at a position where she can share that and speak to that and be open about that. But there are thousands, millions of parties throughout organizations who are struggling
Mhm.
with this emotionally. And it's the stress of the invisibility and the fear that nobody gets what chronic illness is because you're either sick or well. It's that stress that we can alleviate. And as we know, when things look different for people, and you can see that in a leadership role, that starts to change the culture everywhere.
I love this distinction. I subconsciously put out there a bias that I myself have, even though I'm someone living with a chronic illness, that people would present as non traditional in the workforce. And
Quite the
one of
opposite.
the main messages that you're saying is that people, especially women, I'm going to venture to say, are so good at hiding and at navigating their work life despite having a chronic illness that it doesn't look other than traditional. And that's actually part of the problem, that we need to normalize people taking that time off of work when they're ill.
There's time off, but actually what we can normalize is to reduce the stress of the invisibility of it. So you have to have your own personal skills and understand this, because the bias you're talking about, Christina, is the bias that everybody has. It's like, I can't be unwell. So what happens is women work the 12 hours or so. They go home, they immediately go to bed, sleep. They get up, it takes them 30 minutes because they worked out their routine, and then they go do it all again. But they're in pain and emotional tension and stress. And we can actually shift that out of their actual emotional experience internally, which will change their experience at work.
It sounds like a beautiful future that I want to be living in.
Yes.
Michelle, I will put all of the information on how people can reach out to you in the description for this video.
Absolutely. People can reach out to me. We can have a chat.
Thank you so much for taking the time out and having this incredibly enlightening and important conversation.
Thank you so much, Christina, for having me. I really appreciate it.